Welcome back to What Matters This Week. I'm Lauren Maloney. Joining us this Sunday is Laurie Beyranevand. She is with us from the Vermont Law School's Center for Agriculture and Food Systems. Laurie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
I wanted to have you on because there's a new report out from the Vermont Law School about, you could say, a gap when it comes to labor protections for agricultural workers that really were only exacerbated because of the pandemic. So the name of your report is called Essentially Unprotected. But first of all, what made you want to look into this?
That's a great question. So farm workers, as a whole, there's a huge population of farm workers in the U.S. Agriculture, I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that agriculture is one of the most dangerous occupations in the U.S. There's a lot of accidents. There are a lot of exposures to hazardous pesticides. We talk about heat stress in our report. And we worked alongside the Center for a Livable Future at Johns Hopkins, who several years ago did a report on the public health issues facing farm workers. They wanted to update that report in light of the pandemic and asked if we would do a companion report that basically analyzed some of the legal protections or the lack of legal protections for farm workers in the US. So that's where our report originated from.
And as you just mentioned, you highlight two key areas: pesticide exposure and heat-related illness. Let's talk about pesticide exposure first. What did you learn?
So I should say when we started the report, we reached out to a number of advocacy groups that work with farm workers. And the reason we focused in on pesticide exposure and heat-related illness is that those were the two issues that advocates identified as the most pressing needs for labor protection for farm workers. What we found with regard to pesticide exposure is that, at the federal level in the United States, we have a pretty comprehensive set of laws that deal with pesticides generally. When it comes to workers, there are protections. So the Environmental Protection Agency is the agency that's responsible for implementing the pesticide laws in the US, and they developed a worker protection standard that focuses on workers. Unfortunately, the protections for farm workers under the worker protection standard really are focused on protecting workers sort of in light of exposure, as opposed to thinking about how to really prevent exposure to begin with. And so for that reason, some states have tried to fill in the gaps a bit and focus more on prevention, because prevention is one of the strongest tools in making sure that people don't experience pesticide illness.
You mentioned that some of the strongest states that really focused on prevention were California, Hawaii, and Maryland.
Yes.
So how maybe can you borrow from what those states are doing right and possibly implement that here?
So California, I would say, has a really, really strong system in place. Obviously, in the report, we focused on California, both on the pesticide side and on the heat stress side. Because California has been really active in trying to figure out how to protect farm workers. I would say, some of the things that California has done that are really significant. California has some really strong training programs for farm workers. So when we think about prevention, one of the ways to prevent pesticide exposure and related illness is to make sure that farm workers understand the hazards that they're facing with regard to certain pesticides. Many of the farm workers in the US don't speak English, so pesticide labels in the US are printed in English, but if you have a workforce that doesn't speak English, then the labels are then not accessible to them. So California has a really strong program in terms of training and outreach regarding not only the hazards associated with specific pesticides, but also how to self-identify if you're experiencing some sort of pesticide exposure. They also have a number of regulations in place that deal with monitoring. So making sure that workers are actively and sort of consistently monitored for the presence of pesticides, which is, if we had something like that at the federal level, if consistently across the country we were monitoring workers to see what the levels of pesticide exposure are, then we'd be in a great position to think about what some really significant interventions might be to protect that population of workers.
Have you heard from state lawmakers possibly about some of these results?
We did not hear from state lawmakers. We mostly talked to advocacy organizations to see like how were the laws and regulations stacking up essentially, and which ones were the ones that were most effective. Some of what we heard from advocates in California in particular were that the pesticide laws and regulations that California put into place were really effective. In particular, the medical monitoring was really effective. On the heat side, there were some concerns that perhaps California could go a few steps further than it's already done. But that's not to say that any of these things are 100% effective. And I think what advocates are pushing for, advocates that work with farm workers, is really that we start to see some national level standards so that it's consistent across the board in all states. And we don't see varying levels of protection.
When it comes to the heat-related illnesses, obviously we do get some hot spikes in Vermont, but is this as big an issue that we equally need to focus on, as you point out?
I would say so. It's funny that you asked that because somebody else in Vermont asked me the same question. Is this something we even need to worry about in Vermont? And Washington is another state that has been pretty active in terms of thinking about how to enact laws and regulations to protect farm workers, and similar type of climate in Washington as Vermont. It's not California or parts of California. It's not Florida where you're experiencing extreme heat and possibly extreme heat coupled with humidity. But farm workers and any worker actually that's out in the heat can start to experience heat stress at temperatures that we certainly have in Vermont regularly during the summer. So, if you're engaged in strenuous work and you're outdoors for a certain amount of hours and you lack access to water and adequate shade, then it's possible that you could experience heat stress in Vermont just as easily as you might in another climate that we think of as more sort of heat intensive.
If we put aside COVID-19 for a second, how have the risks facing farm workers changed, let's say in the past 10 or so years?
Yeah, I would say, climate change has exacerbated the instances of heat stress for sure. As the climate gets hotter and workers are working more days in heat, then certainly that presents a great amount of risk for them. Drought also, if the conditions are dry and there's not water available, that also exacerbates some of these conditions. The wildfires, one thing that when we were writing this report, was in the midst of, we started this report over a year ago, but it was in the midst of some really significant wildfires. So you had workers that were out in intensive heat, also experiencing respiratory issues from smoke inhalation, but additional heat from the wildfires. And then you also had them exposed to pesticides at the same time that were burning up in these wildfires as well. So you sort of had a toxic soup that these workers were experiencing. So I would say, setting aside the risks from COVID, climate change presents a really serious threat to farm workers as well.
Laurie, you pointed out in the report that farm workers are largely invisible to most Americans. Why do you think that is still the case in 2021?
That's a really great question. I would say, I don't think a lot of people think about the work that goes into the food that they eat. So many of us are really separated from the food that we eat. We don't know where it comes from necessarily. And that might not be the case in Vermont. We're a little bit more connected. We have a really strong local food system in Vermont, but in other places, people are really disconnected from the food system and the work that goes into the food system. And farm workers, many of them live on the farm that they work in. Many of them are relatively isolated because they rely on either their employer or someone else for transportation. Vermont happens to be really unique in the sense that we have a driver privilege card, so that you can get the ability to drive a car without proof of US citizenship or any legal documentation of immigration status, which then puts workers into the community in a way that you might not see farm workers in a community in other places. So it can be a pretty isolating experience. You couple that with people sort of just not really thinking about how their food is produced or who's working on the food that they're eating, and then that becomes a really invisible population of people.
Laurie, you indicated what can change. I wonder, however, is there something that you can pinpoint that Vermont is doing right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Vermont's doing a lot right. I give the driver privilege card as one example that I think is a really significant step for farm workers. Vermont was one of the few states that after COVID, because undocumented workers were ineligible for federal funding and stimulus payments, the Vermont legislature voted to provide economic payments to immigrants that were ineligible for federal funding. And I would say, you know, a lot of people look to Vermont as an example of a state that has, you know, not as significant a population of farm workers as other states, but we do have a pretty significant population in the dairy sector. The estimates are around 1,200 to 1,500 workers, most of whom lack documentation. And people look to Vermont as a model in some ways of things that Vermont has done, and the public sort of perception of farm workers in Vermont is different than in other parts of the country.
Laurie, thanks for your insight. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.